How does someone go from being a fan and an athlete to being a ringside commentator? Today, I'm joined by Tanera Nathan, who's joining me from across the world in Australia to talk about Eternal MMA, his career, and how he's built an amazing platform from the MMA promotion that they work with. You won't want to miss this one. Please give me a subscribe, like, drop a comment if you're enjoying this content. I really appreciate everyone's support. It's what drives me. And now, let's get it. Welcome back to Fight Capital, where we enter the ring of combat sports business. I'm your host, Ryan Rappaport. This morning, I'm honored to be joined by an Australian commentator, MC, and content creator, Tanera Nathan. Tanera is a versatile professional with a passion for combat sports commentary, where he's been making his mark with the Australian promotion Eternal MMA. He combines his love of sport of MMA with his skills and communication to create an amazing experience for anyone joining him. With a background as a rugby athlete, Tanera brings a unique perspective to his commentary, enriching the viewing experience with his insights and enthusiasm for combat sports. Thanks for joining me late evening there in Australia, Tanera. How are you and where are you joining from?
Ryan, I am good. I'm joining you from the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. And I must say, that is quite the introduction.
Appreciate
Thank
that.
you very much. I don't think, not even I know how qualified I am according to yourself. So thank you very much. That means the world.
Well, I've been following Eternal for a while now. I think I connected with Cam O'Neill on LinkedIn a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And obviously with like all the talent that have come out of the organization as well, have followed it closely as an international fan. But, how did you get into the commentary space? Where did you find this passion from for being able to create lively stories for audiences?
I think it was something that was always there. It took a while for me to, discover. So I grew up playing rugby. Now, there's two types of rugby here in Australia, rugby union and rugby league. I played both rugby union and league growing up, and in 2016, I decided to transition those skills over to amateur boxing. So I had a few amateur boxing fights and then quickly realized that I didn't want to be a boxer, that I would leave it to not just the amateurs, but the professionals to make a living out of boxing. And just one day after one of the fighters classes, I went to my coach and I said, look, listen, I'm interested in commentary. I'm interested in announcing. Would there be any opportunities? And we had a local boxing tournament at our PCYC just around the corner from my house here on the Gold Coast. And I said, I'll do it for free. I announced my first show, and about a couple of months later, my first show for play-by-play commentary was for Fox Sports Australia for a show called Boxing Mania. So that's the short story. Fast forward 8 years later, I've been with Eternal for 7 years, and I can honestly say it's a huge blessing, one in which I'm incredibly grateful for. I'm still learning, but I think I'm finally starting to find my rhythm. And, you got to give credit to the fighters because they certainly make my job easy with some very exciting fights. So I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, it's a great point you made about boxing and how you figure out, whether or not that something's for you. It reminds me, I don't know if you're familiar with Nathan Carnage Corbett, 11-time
Absolutely.
world champion. Yeah, I did a seminar with him back in 2018. He's become a friend since then, but and I was one of his test dummies. And I tell everyone who goes and watches his videos, if you really want to know what you have to make it in combat sports, go get leg kicked a couple times by an 11-time world champion.
Yes.
see how much desire you have after that.
Absolutely. In line with what you were saying, I was actually training MMA in 2010. I was signed with one of the sports academies here in Queensland, playing rugby union, and during the off-season, I wanted to actually wrestle and box, so I thought I'd try MMA. My first MMA class we were doing striking, and we were focusing on leg kicks. I checked one leg kick and immediately set myself back to boxing and wrestling. I said, no, MMA is not for me. If leg kicks are a part of the sport, I'm going to leave it to the Muay Thai fighters and the kickboxers because I couldn't handle it. One leg kick, one check, and honestly, it was some of the most extreme pain I think I've ever felt. Didn't last long, but it lasted long enough to know that I wasn't going to do this forever. So to your point, you're right on the money there. Take a leg kick from a world champion Muay Thai fighter, and you'll quickly figure out whether you love fighting or not.
Well, I mean, despite that, though, you've built this beautiful resume of experience and commentary, doing
Mm.
MC work. I know you're doing watch parties as well. How has
Yes.
that experience that you've had with Eternal MMA influenced your approach to building a personal brand in combat sports?
It means everything. Without Eternal, I would not be in the position that I'm in today. I work for a company called the Star Casino, which is the only casino in my city, one of two casinos in the state, and I think one of only about six casinos throughout the country. And I'm the official MC across three properties here on the Gold Coast, in Brisbane and Sydney. I'll share with you quite a funny story. I don't know if you've heard of a segment called Eternal Playback, but it used to stream on ESPN, and it was up for about, I think, maybe 18 months to 2 years. And it was just myself and a color commentator breaking down the previous card, which had just transpired maybe the night before. It was on ESPN between the prelim card and the main card of any UFC pay-per-view. So before they would transition over from ESPN to, I guess, ESPN Plus, where you would have to pay I think, how much is Uncle Dana charging us? $99 for the pay-per-view. They would put our segment up, and that would be streamed on ESPN here in Australia throughout the country. I may have now. This is hypothetical, but it's very important. I may have changed the channel to ESPN, knowing that my segment was coming up at work in the cafeteria. And I remember coming back from the floor, and there was about 50 people surrounding the TV, looking at the TV, then looking over at me, then looking back at the TV. By the time they looked back at me, I was gone. Anyway, the next day I rocked up to work. There was a big poker tournament on, and I was actually dealing in the poker tournament. And they said, "Here, you're on TV last night. Here's the mic, make an announcement." I announced for a couple of hours that day, and I was immediately called into, I think, the head of poker's office, saying that we want to utilize those skills on the mic. So when you ask me what role has Eternal played in my position in MC and commentary today, I wouldn't be here without Cam and Ben and Eternal. So I'm very grateful for the opportunities they've given me. But I had to, I guess, pick up the TV remote and do a bit of work myself as well.
Well, it's those little steps we take. And no, I'm such a huge believer in content creation as a means of personal and professional development as well. It's one of the reasons I do this and enjoy having these conversations. And, one of the things too, it's just someone like yourself who's so ingrained at the lower levels going up to the pro levels of combat sports in MMA. Even, you're not an MMA athlete yourself, but the fact that you've really built this unique perspective as a commentator, where do you see the greatest growth opportunities for the Australian MMA scene now and going into the future, maybe say like the next 5 years?
I think what I've realized is, I started with Eternal beginning of 2018. So yeah, going on 7 years now. When we started, we weren't on UFC Fight Pass. We didn't have, I guess, the streaming platform to where thousands and thousands could watch us each and every month. I really started at a time where the sport was just starting to grow here in Australia. We had guys like, Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya, and maybe a handful of other Australians that were fighting on the world stage. But if you remember back in the day, Ryan, I'm sure you do, you really did have to go overseas to seek your opportunities. Now, we have got a clear and direct pathway for fighters, let's say from the age of 13 when they start training, they can say, I want to have an amateur career, then I want to transition to becoming a professional. What we've managed to do at Eternal is provide a very clear and direct pathway to the UFC. You don't have that, or you didn't have that 7 years ago when I first started. A lot of guys were still fighting overseas. They had to go to the States, maybe even Japan, fight in promotions like a Risen to even get recognized, or a Brace overseas. I don't know if you remember a promotion called ACB. They would tour the world. They came to Australia. It wasn't as, I guess, streamlined as it is today. And I think that's what we've really tried to do is really come up with a product that both amateurs and professionals can be proud of. So when they put their highlights package together, and send it to Uncle Dana or Hunter Campbell or Sean Shelby in the US, they can say, look, I fought on the best stage in Australia. I am now ready for the next level. So I think from a grassroots standpoint, we've really decided to invest a lot of time, effort, resources, and money into making a product that amateurs and professionals can be proud of as a mixed martial artist.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I had a conversation with Arlene Blenko going back. What was that? 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago
Yeah,
now,
yeah, I
and
remember.
she talked about just the way that she's been able to stay there, even though she comes back here to the States. She's doing most of her training there in Australia now.
Mm.
She does go to City Kickboxing too, but I think of someone like Casey O'Neill, who I know came up in Eternal, even though she is training out here in Las Vegas now as well.
Yes.
I'm not trying to or your premise there, but
No, that's
that
okay.
her as talent,
Mm.
speaks to that as a homegrown Australian talent who fought for Eternal and then found herself in the UFC. I mean, I think that totally embraces, and it really speaks to that, the importance of the grassroots and the amateur events and developing talent, and that, not to say that Eternal is not a larger promotion. I mean, they've been doing that, but where do you really see that Eternal is that platform? I know you all are signing fighters now.
Mm.
How do they support that pipeline and help lift up the culture for MMA in Australia?
A lot of it comes down to the relationship that I guess the promotion has with the gyms and the coaches. Because if I'm being honest, there is competition. Eternal, as much as we'd like to believe that it's the only promotion and the only way to get to the UFC, we do have competition. There are other promotions that I guess you could say would provide a similar platform in terms of competition, in terms of making big fights here on the local scene. Probably what sets us apart is that, other than the fact that I guess the athletes most definitely want to be seen on UFC Fight Pass, that certainly helps. But I think Cam and Ben, they have a unique ability to make the fights that the local fans here on the Gold Coast, in Sydney, and especially over in Perth. Perth is probably our biggest fan base other than here in Queensland. They've got the innate ability to make the fights that the local fans want to see, and then by extension, we're able to sell out stadiums almost every time we come to town. So I think as far as Eternal is concerned, we're still going to grow as a promotion, but I think providing consistency. So as a viewer, you know that the 5 fights on the main card, when you turn on UFC Fight Pass, it really is going to be watching the very best mixed martial artists in the country. And I think Cam, Ben, and you got to give credit to the coaches and the fighters for cooperating as well. As we know, coaches and fighters, they're very, very, very cooperative people, aren't they, Ryan? So
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 easy.
you can
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
you can imagine the red tape that promoters, coaches, fighters would have to cut through just to get inside the cage. But once they're in there, again, you're seeing the best of the best. So I think what we've managed to do is just build and network those relationships with the gyms. So it's not just one big name fighter from City Kickboxing fighting another big name fighter from, I guess, Southside MMA. You've got maybe 5 or 6 from one gym and maybe 5 or 6 from another, going to war each and every time.
Yeah, the other profession I would add to that list would be agents. Always
Oh
the
yeah.
the best part. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you can't understate the importance of the UFC Fight Pass. A lot of people like to talk trash about it, but
Mm.
as an athlete, as a friend or brand partner of an athlete as well, I've experienced where there were promotions that was their main thing. You're going to be fighting on UFC Fight Pass. This
Mm.
exposure you're going to get. And I've also seen what happened when something happened and they weren't going to be on Fight Pass, that
Mm.
short out from event, and how many people actually dropped off of their card. So there's something very important to say about that. And also, I don't think people realize it's not a massive financial boost you
No.
get from being on Fight Pass. It comes down to tickets sold, and that's the
Mm.
lifeblood for smaller promotions. You can't make it all about what your digital play is going to be, because really it's the exposure that you're getting from that. But I think that's something I've also seen really good from Eternal as well, is that it's the social media, the
Mm.
digital platforms, and the online content that the team invests in there. And how important would you say that aspect in the social media and digital realm is in the strategy to grow your personal profile, but as well as Eternal's audience.
Yeah, I've actually realized that unfortunately the world has changed. Social media is everything. And I say unfortunately because I don't know if you're a bit like myself, but the old school, we'd always want to see ourselves on the back page of the newspaper or on the 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock news. Fortunately for the athletes these days, on the other side of that coin, that they can almost be their own promoter. A lot like I use my social media to promote, I guess, my own brand in terms of commentary and MC. What we're finding with Eternal is that any time that people want information about the promotion or about athletes or about fighters, if they're not going to their own personal profile on Instagram or TikTok, they'll come to the Eternal page. So that plays a massive role, not just growing the fan base, but keeping the current fan base up to date. And a lot of work definitely goes into that, especially during the live shows, because even though I'll be commentating, there'll be live updates, obviously, as you're watching it live on UFC Fight Pass. But if you're not watching it, you can tune into the Eternal Instagram, and we're posting photos, videos, highlights almost in real time just after it happens. So it's, when you talk about social media overall, I'm sure you know yourself as a content creator, it's essential in sports today, and it's no different for us at Eternal as well.
Yeah, I always like to clarify. I am not a journalist.
I
I have
didn't want to use that word.
no. And it's because I write content. You know, I just fired my newsletter back up. I spend a lot of time. It's a lengthy process for me to do that. It is an investment. Same thing with building this content. But that investment's paid back to me. This is, essentially in a way, a business development tool. I don't like to, say that I'm making this off of other people's back. I'm just lucky I'm getting this education as I go along and talking to people internationally and who are in different parts of the industry to really take advantage of that for myself, growing my own platform, but also being able to communicate that to a lot of other people. And even a niche subject like this always surprises me, who comes out of the woodworks and being like, oh, I saw your interview with da 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 da. And I'm like, wow, okay. Didn't know you were one of the 30 people that watched it on YouTube. I'm glad to know that. But it really, I think there's so much power in these digital platforms, and to see, someone like yourself, I had seen your work at Eternal before, but when I was scrolling through Instagram, I was like, oh, he's hosting these watch parties. That's a big thing here in Las Vegas, with the casinos. I'm sure make a lot of money based off what I've seen, but that ability to show who you are outside of sitting in the commentary booth, I think is such a massive part of these digital platforms. And I really like seeing someone like yourself taking advantage of that and growing your own rep. How do you see that the fan engagement in combat sports can be enhanced through that commentary and storytelling? And do you really see yourself playing a role in that aspect?
Hey everyone, quick favor to ask. Did you know that nearly 80% of the people tuning in right now aren't subscribed yet? That subscribe button down below is what powers me every week to keep putting out these podcasts. Big shout out and thank you to everyone that's been supporting me for this. I couldn't do it without you. If you're enjoying the content, please subscribe below. It means the world to me. And for everyone supporting me, thank you so much. Now back to the show.
It's interesting because, as you know, MMA fans are some of the most polite, respectful fans in the world. In the world, let's face it. I have never worked in an industry where fans are so vocal, so passionate. At times they are incredibly toxic, and I'm sure you've probably faced it yourself. I mean, it's almost a crime to have your own opinion, because, and I understand that as a fan myself and as a fan yourself, you can certainly understand, I guess, where the fans come from. We can get very tribal very quickly. And as far as fan engagement, I've always found that when, and it's hard for me to do this as a play-by-play commentator, but when you're impartial, everyone leaves you alone. As soon as you draw a line in the sand and pick a side, well, not only do you alienate, I guess, half the fan base, but you're going to have half that cheer for you and half that boo you. So obviously I can't do that when I'm working for Eternal, but there have been times where I guess I've done color commentary for maybe an amateur show where I've given my opinion purposely to disrupt the status quo, whether it's on social media or for those watching. And what it does is, when you talk about engagement can be positive and it can be negative. But I didn't realize, like yourself, I didn't realize how many people actually listen to me, because I'm barely listening to myself when I'm working. But as far as fan engagement, whether it's on social media or in person, I find that when you draw the line and have an opinion, that's where you find out where you really stand amongst the fans. When it comes to the watch parties, I like what you brought up there, because I can imagine the parties in the States would be 10 times as big as they are here. But the UFC 300 watch party, where we invited Robert Whittaker and he come out, we had over 1,000 people, not just in the sports bar, but we had to actually move it to the theatre and have a special meet and greet for him, because he is almost I'm just going to say it, he is a living legend here in Australia, and the most beloved fighter in our country, and I dare say one of the most beloved fighters throughout the world. And it was just so good to see the fans come out in force and meet him. So those types of engagements that I'm trying to kick off at the casino, specifically surrounding MMA in relation to the UFC. We're going to try and get Alexander Volkanovski, Israel Adesanya, Carlos Ulberg, all of them. We're going to try and bring them all here. Stephen Erceg, I was in contact with. Had he beaten Pantoja, I can imagine that his price for an appearance fee would have gone up significantly. We would have paid it, because we want to give back to the athletes for their sacrifice. And it's the fans, essentially, that pay their hard-earned money to come and enjoy the.
I could talk for hours about that in terms of the power that these athletes bring. I know a guy who's not going too into specifics, but he works with a recently UFC legendary heavyweight. And this guy, they have a deal that they're working with the NFL Hall of Fame here, and he's become as like a personal sponsor for this athlete, takes him to these events through the NFL Hall of Fame, and you have legends of NFL coming up and being like wanting to talk to this guy and like engage with him. And it's funny because he has no idea who any of these people are. People have noticed that, though. People at the Hall of Fame have noticed that people are wanting to engage with this guy, and they're like, oh, who would have thought? You know, the business that is backing him too. They're like, there's one guy who got it, but everyone else at the company is like, why are we sponsoring this random person and bringing him all these other places? But it really speaks to the power of the athletes. And my personal mission is all about making sure money goes to the athletes, you know, from the brand partnerships perspective. I think it is a trickle down. And to your point about those MC hosts, I mean, I'm sure the amount of people that showed up was just a huge eye opener for the casino, and showed the power of, okay, next time we have a watch party, we know we need to have a MMA personality there, because it brings X amount of people, and those X amount of people spend X amount of money. There is a way you can quantify that for, you know, a company like Star Casinos.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we haven't had a watch party like the one we had for UFC 300 with Rob. We've had other events such as, you know, we've had rugby events where we've invited former international test rugby players. We've had a rugby league where we've invited former athletes. Nothing compares to how hot the UFC is right now, and that's just where the sport is at the moment. You know, we always say it's the fastest growing sport in the world. I dare say it would probably be, other than soccer, the most popular sport in Australia. Soccer, very difficult to compete with soccer on a global scale. But when you're talking about MMA in terms of internationally as well as domestically, when you have a guy with the star power like a Robert Whittaker, like an Israel Adesanya, Alex Volkanovski, I can't really think of another athlete in Australia that would bring not just eyes to the sport, but people inside the doors of the casino. And I said that to my boss. I said, look, you don't have to know who he is. I know who he is. Just trust me. All right. And as soon as he saw one person, 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people walk through the door, he just kind of goes, all right, you're in charge now. Whoever you want, just let me know. I trust you. And that's all it took. And again, credit to the athletes, and like yourself, it's all about, I guess, you know, we kind of know our role. We know our seat in the sport. Again, it does go back to that premise of, we want the focus to be on the athletes, because again, we know how much they sacrifice and how hard they work. So I'm grateful we're on the same page, Ryan, because there's a few vultures here in Australia that think it's about themselves. So it's good.
Well,
it's good to hear
as an Aussie, you know, as an Aussie, I know that you know the power of the AFL, of cricket,
yes,
of rugby. and so for you to say that as someone who's boots on the ground really confirms for me just, how important the sport is in the industry and building the kind of future of athletics too, because I think it's in the next 5 to 10 years is going to look a lot different. But that's also why I think these type of conversations are important. I know it's super late where you are, and I don't want to take too much of your time.
I'm wide awake.
Yeah, now you are, right?
I'm wide awake.
What advice would you give to someone who's in the same position you were 8-10 years ago, aspiring to work in combat sports, whether that's as a commentator or, in any other aspect, and particularly regarding building those necessary skills and making the connections in the industry?
That is a great question. And I often ask myself, what would I tell me 8 years ago? I think the inspiration that I got in 2016 was to just start. I had no idea. I had no idea that I would end up on TV on ESPN. I had no idea that I'd end up interviewing Rob Whittaker on stage in front of a few hundred people. I had no idea that I'd be the lead commentator for Eternal MMA. And then obviously next month, UFC 305 is here. I'm going to Perth to do that show, and then obviously see Duplessis versus Adesanya the next day. My advice would be just start. It's never going to be perfect from the beginning, but you're never going to know unless you actually do it. I sat on this thought of commentary, of emceeing, probably for about 2 or 3 years without never doing anything. It wasn't until I actually went to my coach and said, hey, look, listen, just give me a chance. Give me the mic. And if I'm good, I'll keep doing it. If I suck, I'll stop doing it. So that would be my very simple advice. 2 words, just start. I hope Nike doesn't sue me because it's quite different to just do it, but just start. And you'll figure it out very quickly whether this is something that you love or like getting kicked in the leg at your first MMA class, it's something that you're probably not going to pursue. So yeah, definitely just start.
Well, in the immortal words of the old dirty bastard, give him the mic and let him take it away, and I love that and appreciate this conversation because I think a lot of people are going to get value from this. And thank you so much for doing the late night call, my early morning here, and really looking forward to seeing the next Eternal event. When are you guys going to be back on? You got a fight coming up, don't you?
Yes, so August the 17th here in Australia. That'll be a Saturday night. That's the Eternal 87. Massive card. I think we were scheduled to have 3 title fights. I think now we've only got 2, but some massive fights on the main card for Eternal 87. And then next day, August 18th here in Australia, which would be August 17th in the States, would be Duplessis Adesanya for the UFC Middleweight Championship in Perth. So I know you'll be watching that one for sure.
Oh, I will. Yeah. And I'm thinking about, I know some of the chosen advisory guys are going to be there as well.
Yes.
So it's going to be a great event, a great night, hopefully a great night for Australia. And really looking forward to seeing the next card that you guys put on. Thanks so much, Tanera, for taking this time.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you, mate.
Cheers.